What's happening, everybody? Justin, Bridgewater's Finest on YouTube, Blockbuster_guy on Twitter, second round NHL Stanley Cup playoff predictions. They're coming at you. I didn't get a chance to go to bed yet. It's still early. The NHL are still dicks for starting this thing tonight, but here come the predictions. Last round, of course, I had a 5-3 record, as I mentioned in my reaction video. I was 3-1 in the Western Conference, 2-2 in the East, but I'm going to start in the East this time to see if I can improve that record a little bit. In the Eastern Conference, we have a 1v7 matchup. We have the number 1 ranked Pittsburgh Penguins taking on those pesky Sens, the Ottawa Senators, at number 7. Regular season records, of course. Once again, Pittsburgh was 36-12 in the regular season for 72 points. Ottawa was 25-17-6 for 56 points. In the playoffs, Pittsburgh is 4-2, dispatching the New York Islanders in 6 games, outscoring them 25-17. Ottawa is 4-1, having beaten the Montreal Canadiens in the first round in 5 games, outscoring them 20-9. The season series between these two teams, Pittsburgh won all 3 games. Pittsburgh outscored Ottawa in those 3 games 9-4, so offensive problems there for the Senators. The Senators, however, did outshoot Pittsburgh 96-88 in those 3 games. Now, something to note about this series throughout the season, the teams combined for 110 penalty minutes, but only went 2 for 27 combined on their power plays. Now, of course, a lot of those penalty minutes stem from the incident, which I'm not really going to talk about here because A, it's old news, B, it's old news, and C, it's really old news. So I'm not really going to talk too much about it here, but again, 110 penalty minutes combined in 3 games, but only 2 for 27 on the power play. So I think special teams is going to be a real determinant here in how this series goes. Home versus away advantage for Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh at home, including the playoffs, are 20-7 this season versus Ottawa just 12-15 on the road. So this is a major advantage, in my eyes, to the Pittsburgh Penguins playing at home. Home versus away advantage for Ottawa. Ottawa has a very good home record of 17-9 this year versus Pittsburgh on the road, but Pittsburgh is 20-7 on the road. So to me, it's a very minor, a slight advantage to Pittsburgh, in fact, being a slightly better road team than I think Ottawa is a home team. Offense versus defense head-to-head, including the playoffs. Pittsburgh has scored 190 goals this year, only giving up 136, versus Ottawa, who has scored exactly 136, but has only given up 113. But naturalized head-to-head, I see this as a 152-136 advantage for Pittsburgh. Spread that out over a season. It's an average of about 1/3 of a goal per game extra for the Pittsburgh Penguins. X Factors. X Factors are returning in the second round. X Factors for the Pittsburgh Penguins. Where do they go in net? Do they keep going with Vokoun, who's definitely, of course, riding the hot hand? Or do they go back to Fleury? I mean, Fleury's the franchise, but Vokoun arguably, well, not arguably, blatantly played much, much better in the first round. Not only that, it's kind of an interesting storyline between Vokoun and Craig Anderson. I don't think there's any animosity or heat there, but they did used to play together, so there is that storyline there. So what do? Do you stick with Vokoun, or do you go back to your franchise goaltender? Also, I gotta wonder how the Pens are going to react to the fact that they are going to be playing a significantly upgraded team than they did in the first round in terms of their defensive and goaltending capabilities. Now, obviously, the Islanders are not a great defensive and goaltending team. Ottawa is. They have a great goaltender and they have a great defensive system. So it's going to be real interesting to see how Pittsburgh and that real high-octane offense, it's going to be real interesting to see how Pittsburgh reacts to that. X Factors for Ottawa. This is the only other time that I will mention the Erik Karlsson-Matt Cooke incident. Can the Senators keep their emotions in check? It'll be real interesting to see that, especially in the first couple of games in this series. There's been a lot of words thrown back and forth by Ottawa's owner, Eugene Melnyk, who Eugene Melnyk is a total douchebag. I also have to ask how the Senators plan on keeping that potent offense in Pittsburgh, which we just talked about, and not only keep it off the scoreboard, but have it playing Ottawa's game. A grinding, low-scoring. How do I think it's going to go? All the numbers really lean towards Pittsburgh. And since I think Pittsburgh is going to stick with Tommy Vokoun, I think they'd be dumb not to. I really got to go with Pittsburgh in this series. I just think Pittsburgh's got too much. I think Pittsburgh wins the opening two at home. I actually think this is going to be a home series, to be perfectly honest. I think Pittsburgh wins the opening two. I think Ottawa goes home, still with a huge boost from beating Montreal and being at home. I think Ottawa wins both of their home games in games 3 and 4. They go back to Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh wins in game 5, but I think Pittsburgh goes over on Ottawa in game 6. So my official prediction, the Pittsburgh Penguins to beat the Ottawa Senators in 6 games. The other matchup in the Eastern Conference is a 4 versus 6 matchup, which sees the Boston Bruins play host to the New York Rangers. Regular season records. Boston was 28-14-6 for 62 points, almost winning that division. The Rangers 26-18-4 for 56 points. Playoff records so far, both teams are 4-3, both teams having gone to Game 7. Luckily for them, this series doesn't start until Thursday. Boston outscored the Maple Leafs 22-18 in their 7 games. The Rangers outscored the Capitals 16-12. The season series here, the Rangers were actually 2-1 in the season series. However, they tied at 9 goals apiece. Boston pretty heavily outshot the Rangers, outshot them by about 20 shots. Worth noting, 2 of the 3 games between these two teams this year went to either overtime or a shootout. Home versus away advantage for the Bruins. The Bruins this year, including playoffs, are 18-10 at home versus just an 11-17 road record for the Rangers. Now, saying that, the Rangers did beat Washington in Game 7, and Boston did struggle against the Leafs in Boston in Game 7. It's still, to me, a major advantage for the Boston Bruins. Home versus away advantage for the Rangers. The Rangers, I argue, are a better home team than Boston. 19-8, playoffs included at home, versus Boston, who is just barely over 500, 14-13 total on the road. This, to me, is a significant advantage, if not a major one, for the New York Rangers. Offense versus defense. Playoffs included, Boston has scored 153 goals on the season, giving up 127, versus the Rangers, who have scored just 146, but who have only given up 124. Naturalized head-to-head, this to me is a 139-137 advantage for the Boston Bruins, which is only about 4/100ths of an extra goal per game. X factors for the Bruins. The Bruins have 4 of the top 12 scorers in the playoffs right now. That being said, they have big-time members of their roster who are really screwing the pooch right now. Boston needs Brad Marchand, Tyler Seguin, and especially Jaromir Jagr. They need those guys to step up in a big, bad way because they all had embarrassing Game 7s. And Boston needs to keep their dominance in the face-off circle going. They lead the playoffs, winning over 60%. Actually, it might be exactly 60% of the face-offs so far in the first round, whereas the Rangers only won around 49.2%. So Boston really needs to keep up that face-off dominance to keep the puck, keep control, and do well in this series. X factors for the New York Rangers. Stay disciplined. The Rangers only took 16 penalties in the first round, so they do need to stay disciplined. They were only shorthanded 16 times. They only gave up 3 power play goals against. Block, 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 and block some more. Boston leads these playoffs with 39 shots per game. They are the number 1 team in the playoffs. The Rangers have averaged 23 blocked shots per game, which also leads the playoffs. So any success that the Rangers are going to have is going to be predicated on being able to get in front of those Boston shots. And yes, that even includes the 108-mile-an-hour slap shot from Zdeno Chara. How do I think the series is going to go? Boston, in the tail end of that series, did not impress me. Boston has a very simple formula. They try to jump down your throat early, and then it's almost like they have an adrenaline dump towards the latter part of the period. They try to jump down your throat and get maybe a goal or two early, and then they'll just sit back. And it feels to me like Boston as a team gets tired. I don't think the Rangers are going to fall victim to that. I think the Rangers are a good enough fundamental defensive team that they can weather that storm and spend the rest of the period just grinding Boston down. I think the Rangers are going to have a lot of success in the third period in this series. I think this is a bad matchup for Boston. I'm going to take the upset. I'm going to take the New York Rangers. I think the Rangers beat Boston in, I'm going to say 6 games. I think they split the first 2 games in Boston. I think the Rangers win game 1 because I think Lundqvist is still obviously rolling. Boston coming back and winning game 2. I think the Rangers win both games in New York to take a 3-1 series lead. They come back to Boston. I think Boston wins game 5 in Boston. They go back to New York for game 6, and I think the Rangers close out the series in game 6. My official prediction is the New York Rangers to defeat the Boston Bruins in 6 games. We keep the momentum going and go to the Western Conference now. The number 1 ranked Chicago Blackhawks, again, are going to take on another number 7 seed. In both conferences, we have a 1 versus 7 matchup. So the Chicago Blackhawks is the number 1 seed, taking on the number 7 Detroit Red Wings. These are, of course, divisional foes with a long, long history together. Chicago in the regular season, President's Trophy winning best record, 36-7-5 for 77 points. Detroit squeaked into the playoffs in 7th place, 24-16-8 for 56 points. In the playoffs, Chicago is 4-1. Of course, that series with Minnesota going to 5 games, outscoring their opponents 17-7. Detroit is 4-3 as their series with Anaheim went to 7 games, being outscored in those 7 games 18-21. Chicago dominated the season series, winning all 4 games against Detroit, outscoring them in those 4 games 14-5. It's a big margin. Detroit, however, interestingly enough, holds the advantage in shots, 126-114. If you take away the 7-1 game that these two teams had this year, scoring was Chicago 7-4. This is, again, if you take away the 7-1 game. And 3 of those games went to overtime or a shootout. So I think if you take out the outlier, this is actually going to be a closer series than those numbers dictate. Home versus away advantage for the Blackhawks. At home this year, the Blackhawks were 21-6, playoffs included. Just a phenomenal record, really. For versus Detroit, who was only 13-15 on the road. So this is the majorest of major advantages for the Chicago Blackhawks. Home versus away advantage for the Red Wings. The Red Wings were above 500 at home this year at 15-12. However, the Blackhawks were 19-7 on the road. So this is a significant, if not a major advantage for the Chicago Blackhawks. Offense versus defense. Playoffs included, Chicago has scored 172 goals this year while giving up only 109 versus Detroit, who scored 142 but gave up 136. Naturalized head-to-head, this is a 154-126 advantage for Chicago, an advantage of over half a goal per game versus Detroit's defense. X factors for Chicago. Intimidation, as far as I'm concerned. Both of these teams know who holds the offensive advantage between the two. And Chicago really needs to use that to their advantage. In round 1, Chicago scored as many goals in 5 games as Detroit scored in 7. Chicago's defensemen were also plus 16 in round 1. So as far as I'm concerned, given the offensive threats that we do know that Detroit has, Zetterberg, Datsuk, I think you let Duncan Keith handle the offensive defenseman duties solely. I think you drop every other D you have back to focus on Detroit's big guns. Chicago doesn't need to have their defensemen be up and trying to get involved in the offense. What they need to do is focus on the big, dangerous goal scorers that Detroit does have. X factors for the Red Wings. You got to wonder, can Jimmy Howard keep his hot streak going from games 4 to 7? And this is against the NHL's best team. Now, yes, they had high-level competition in the last round in Anaheim. There's nobody on Chicago that's Corey Perrying right now. So it's a different ball game. It's much more dangerous. So it'll be interesting to see if Jimmy Howard can keep that streak going. Also, Chicago took 19 penalties in round 1. Detroit earned 18 power play points in round 1. The big key for Detroit here, be opportunistic. If Chicago takes a penalty, if they give you an opportunity, you gotta capitalize on it, or Detroit is just going to get blown out of the water here. How do I think it's going to go? It was really cool to see Detroit beat Anaheim in the first round. Quite frankly, I don't think they're beating Chicago. I think the numbers are too solidly in Chicago's favor. I do think Detroit wins a game in Chicago. It's going to have to be early in the series. It's going to have to be either game 1 or game 2. I'm going to give them game 1 because they're still riding the high there from beating Anaheim, and Chicago hasn't played in a while. So I'll give Detroit game 1. I think Chicago wins game 2. I think Chicago wins game 3. I think Detroit can manage to beat them once in Detroit, so I think Detroit wins game 4. I think this is a 2-2 series through the first 4 games. But Chicago beats them in game 5 coming back home, and then Chicago I think is too good a road team, so I think they do take 2 of 3 from Detroit in Detroit. So Chicago wins game 6 and wins the series. My official prediction is the Chicago Blackhawks to beat the Detroit Red Wings in 6 games. And the final playoff matchup of the second round sees the number 5 ranked Los Angeles Kings play host to the number 6 ranked San Jose Sharks. Regular season records, the Kings were 27-16-5, raking in 59 points. The Sharks were not far behind at 25-16-7 for 57 points. Playoff records, the Kings are 4-2, having beaten the Blues in 6 games, outscoring the Blues 12-10. San Jose, of course, swept Vancouver right out of town in 4 straight, so they are 4-0 in the playoffs, outscoring their opponents 15-8. The season series, the Kings were 2-1-1 in the season series to have the advantage. The Kings with an edge in goal scoring 13-11 and in shots by a relatively significant margin 131-108. The main thing about this series, the home team won all 4 games. And I honestly think this is going to be the big determinant in this series, is how the teams play at home. Home versus away advantage for the Kings. The Kings are arguably the best home team in the NHL with a record of 22-5, playoffs included. On the road, San Jose is only 10-16. So this is obviously a major advantage for the LA Kings. Home versus away advantage for the Sharks. Sharks are a pretty damn good home team in their own right. 19-7, playoffs included, versus the Kings, who are only 9-18 this season, playoffs included on the road. So this is a major advantage for the San Jose Sharks. Offense versus defense. The Kings, playoffs included, have scored 145 goals this year, giving up 128. The Sharks have only scored 139, but have only given up 124. Naturalized head-to-head, I give this a slight 135-134 advantage for the Kings, which is only about 2/100ths of an extra goal per game. So really, there's no significant advantage there. X factors for the Kings. Obviously, the Kings have huge momentum at home. They've won 10 straight. I have to ask, against another Californian team, is there home ice advantage one way or the other? I'm sure the fan bases would be quick to jump in and say, yeah, there's home ice advantage, but I have to ask, they're both Californian teams. Is there a real home ice advantage there? I don't know. And I don't understand why, when the Kings were such road warriors last year in the playoffs, can they figure out how to win a game on the road in this series? against a very good home team in San Jose. X factors for the Sharks, keeping their legs. They haven't played since May the 7th. Does that help them with a bunch of rest? Or does that hurt them? Does that take any momentum that they had from sweeping the Canucks, and does that just rip it right away from them? And I also have to ask, while San Jose is a slightly better road team than the Kings, they're not exactly great. And in this series, the other team has the extra home game should it go to 7 games. So I'll be interested to see if San Jose can beat LA in LA. And I think they can. I wouldn't have thought that they would have beaten Vancouver twice in Vancouver, but they did. And in their last, I would say, 14 or 15 road games this year, they were playing around 500 hockey. They were just dog shit at the beginning of the year. LA has only won one road game in their last, I think it was 9 or 10 in the regular season, so I'm not overly confident about the Kings' ability to steal home ice away from San Jose. So if San Jose can win a road game, which I think they do, I think San Jose wins this series. I got to take the quote-unquote upset here. I don't think there's really an upset in a 5 versus 6, but I'm going to take the Sharks, actually. I think they split the first 2 games in Los Angeles. I think LA wins game 1, but I think San Jose steals game 2. San Jose, I think, wins games 3 and 4 in San Jose. I think the Kings come back and win game 5 at home because, again, they're the best home team in the league. But I don't think the Kings can beat San Jose on San Jose's home ice. So I'm going to take San Jose to win game 6 and win this series. My official prediction is the San Jose Sharks to beat the Los Angeles Kings in, you guessed it, 6 games. I'm just noticing I predicted 6 games in every series. Those are the official predictions, everybody. Eastern Conference, I have the Pittsburgh Penguins beating the Ottawa Senators in 6 games in the 1v7 matchup. And in the 4 versus 6, I have the 6th-seeded New York Rangers beating the Boston Bruins, also in 6 games. Western Conference, I have the number 1 ranked Chicago Blackhawks beating the number 7 ranked Detroit Red Wings in, you guessed it, 6 games. And in the 5 versus 6 matchup, I have the San Jose Sharks beating the Los Angeles Kings in, guess how many games? You betcha, 6. So I'm predicting that in the Eastern and the Western Conference, the championship series will both be a 1 versus 6. And I don't know if that's ever happened before, but I think it's going to happen. That's it for me, Justin, Bridgewater's Finest on YouTube, Blockbuster_guy on Twitter, and now I'm going back to bed.